I haven't got the excitement of 5G, but 2020 is going to be a whirlwind year for television. Apart from the opportunities that will soon become apparent as Britain creates a new set of relationships with the rest of the world, we in television will have a resetting of the regulatory and the policy environment. 2020 is a bumper year, offering the TV industry the full set, a new Secretary of State, a new BBC Director General, a new head of Ofcom, and a review of public service broadcasting. Now, I for one welcome this review, because we must look at the challenges and the opportunities that we face in the industry using data and using research. Otherwise, we risk relying on arguments that are based on passion and on partisanship. And while business, just like politics, can't thrive without belief, we need more than just that. So in advance of this review, we are asking very big questions of ourselves. As you might expect, we're using a bit of a Channel 4 approach. We're looking at the challenges, but we're looking at them from a different angle. We're focusing on the things and on the people that might otherwise be overlooked. The pace of change, as you know, is accelerating. And it's not just streamers versus broadcasters or long form versus short form, not just video on demand versus linear. It's all of the above. And it's very much driven by the speed at which audiences adapt to new ways of watching. And I believe that Channel 4 can control our destiny in these changes by being bold and being radical and taking risks and being innovative. Of course, I would take this chance to remind you, all without a cost to the British taxpayer. Now, we always see periods of change as times that suit Channel 4. And this is certainly a time when our role is going to be different. And we think it will be crucial to the future of public service content in Britain. As a democratic culture, universal and accountable and accessible television is a fundamental part of bringing everyone in this country into focus, and at the same time of building an image of this country around the world. Channel 4 has a role and a responsibility to be right at the heart of that fundamental idea. And I do believe that in order to maintain positive public service influence in Britain, whether that's presenting controversial issues or when it's about maintaining a common culture, television has to be able to reach all audiences at scale, as well as nowadays with some brilliance. Other broadcasters and streamers cannot reach the hard-to-reach audiences that Channel 4 does, not with the same scale, and nor with the mission to speak to them and to listen to them that Channel 4 does in ways that ensure that they are involved in social change. So I thought I'd tell you a bit about how we're doing on that mission right now. Firstly, we have huge resonance with young audiences, not just on our linear channels, but on digital too. More than half of all four's views come from 16 to 34-year-olds, and all four profiles young, like the SVODs, Netflix and Amazon. We think really hard about how to reach those young people in new ways. In 2019, we became the only PSB to launch shows on Snapchat. We put shows like Celebs Go Dating, Don't Tell the Bride, and Tattoo Fixers, all shows with which I'm sure this audience is extremely familiar. And we put them on Snap, someone is. We put them on Snap, and they reached over 35 million viewers on Snap, ways in which we can go out and find our audience on the platforms they are. And because young people know and they trust our brand, despite their evolving consumption behaviors, we have seen an upsurge in young audiences, engaging in news and in serious factual. The interest and the appetite from young people in factual content is not what general opinion would have it. We see young people with a growing interest in serious content, and we know what's driving it. Happiness among 16 to 25-year-olds is currently at its lowest point in the history of the Prince's Trust Youth Study. This generation is overwhelmed by the pressures of our times, particularly the impact on them of social media. Their response to this situation has been to get more serious, not less. This is the first generation that has been raised in a fully globalized world. And as such, they embrace difference, they embrace empathy, and they have a sense of mission about the world. So they're not afraid of serious subject matter, like mental health, or the environment, the housing crisis, the psychological effects of social media. And it's what's drawn them to our shows like The Circle and serious documentaries like Leaving Neverland about a global paedophilia scandal, or Jade, a show about examining class and politics in modern Britain. And look too at Hollyoaks, our soap, which also this audience may not be totally familiar with, but you may have watched it in the past. But in a year that it tackled really big issues like the rise of the far right in Britain, we overtook Coronation Street for volume of young viewers, and to my very great delight, we also won Soap of the Year. Also Channel 4 News, which saw a huge growth in its young audience share. That's not what you would expect when you read the popular media about young people, but it is what they're interested in and how we're engaging them. Secondly, we engage and we include audiences who feel overlooked and excluded. Our share of Black and minority ethnic audiences was up significantly in peak last year, especially on Channel 4 News. Now, it's worth saying that this isn't by accident. In the last 2 years, we've taken a big shift from just looking at the diversity of our output to really thinking about what authentic portrayal actually means. And so last year, we began tracking whether Black and minority ethnic viewers thought Channel 4 was actually representing them authentically. And this has helped us unpick the web of factors that determine what these viewers want on TV. They want genuine inclusion. They don't just want representation on the screen. They want to see the TV connect to both their communities and to the wider world. And it was very clear that their culture shapes their tastes much more than their ethnicity. And they very much look to television to provide a multi-generational viewing experience more. And thirdly, we at Channel 4 speak to, and more importantly, we listen to, people whose votes in the Brexit referendum and in the 2019 election told us that they had had enough of being ignored by broadcasters. In the last 2 years, we've fundamentally changed our organisation to better represent all of the UK. We've now opened the doors of our national HQ in Leeds, so I'm gonna give Tristia a run for her money on wanting this to be in Manchester. And we've put bases in Bristol and Glasgow. And we already have more than 180 of our staff based outside of London. More importantly, we've shifted the balance of our creative team considerably with commissioners from across our programme genres based in our offices outside of London. And that means for us, with creative decision makers living and working in different communities and being much, much closer to the communities that we serve, we'll be making creative decisions that are more rooted in the tastes and the themes of the UK, not just in those of London. And I think it's fair to say that in post-Brexit Britain, it will be even more important to ensure that we're speaking to the issues and the concerns that have driven the divides that we now see across the nation. And Channel 4 has a central part in paying attention to and representing authentically and celebrating the people and the places of the UK. I have checked, and levelling up is not actually within our written remit, but I am certain that spreading opportunity across the country is very much in Channel 4's genetic code. We already know that when we get that right, when we can bring local issues to the fore without being parochial, it can drive gratifyingly big audiences. For us, that means shows like Dairy Girls, shows like Gogglebox, shows with strong regional voices, not to mention the accents those voices actually speak in. Rooted in different parts of the UK, they attract massive national audiences in this age of fragmented content. Now, this isn't just about societal impact. Our investment in television and film in the nations and regions is creating jobs across the sector, and it's vital that we do that in order to rebalance and to supercharge the creative economy, not just domestically, but globally. So far so good. But at the same time as we're glancing in the rearview mirror about what we did last year, it would be madness for me to ignore the challenges that lie ahead. There is one in particular over which we as an industry have had very little influence. In the near future, our concerns need to be about control of the screen itself. We all know that Apple's iOS and Google's Android are the operating systems that power more than 95% of the mobile screens and tablets in the UK and beyond. They now, of course, have a new way into people's homes, the smart speaker, available already in almost a third of UK households. And Amazon, of course, has a dominant share of this market. All three of those tech giants are now focused on extending their control to the most influential screen of all, the television screen. Amazon's Fire Stick leads the streaming stick market in the UK, with Google's Chromecast and Apple TV just behind them. Amazon are now launching their own Fire TV sets, and it's not unreasonable to expect that in the next 3 years, Google will have their operating system, Android TV, on more than half the sets that are sold in the UK. Now, we may be able to do deals for prominence now, but we don't fully know what the long-term impact of this will be. But one thing we can be very certain of is that none of these players has any vested interest in, or perhaps even any understanding of, public service broadcasting. They're certainly not interested in British-originated content that serves the interests of all Britons. They're not interested in growing the range of production companies in the UK that offer jobs and creative opportunities for all corners of the country. What possible incentive could there be for a Silicon Valley giant to encourage production in Northern Ireland, or in Scotland, or in the northeast of England? Public service broadcasting is built on the core principle of PSBs being given prominence in exchange for delivering content which has clear public values for UK audiences. That basic proposition is in stark contrast to the West Coast players' business model. For them, prominence means either putting their own services first or selling them to the highest bidder. This threat could be even more severe when you look at the provision of news. Do we as consumers care that without a regulated PSB system, our most prominent news feeds could be selected by US companies that are more concerned about profit than about trust or about accuracy? News scraping, which sounds rather painful, but the real pain will be felt by communities whose interests are ignored when impartial and regulated journalism is buried by those who have the means to pay the most. Trusting each other begins with discussions and with debates that are based on facts, that are obtained from sources that we can be confident are credible and are free of commercial pressures. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never felt a greater need for consensus in this country. And the weakening of the ability of public service television to inform, to educate, and yes, to entertain, is not the route to getting it. In America, where the bulk of OTT content we see will come from, if PSBs in the UK are too weakened to provide it, there is very little effort to confront these issues. Usually, subjects like gender or addiction or poverty are seen as ways of provoking audiences, not informing them. Streamers are much more likely to see controversy as a route to subscription growth rather than reconciliation. Now, here we see public service broadcasting as something that protects our society by revealing things, by discussing them, by normalizing them, or sometimes by debating them. In the future, we're going to have to maintain that philosophy, because once it's gone, it won't be coming back. If there is a possibility that British public service content will struggle even to get in front of the people who value it, the British public, then that is something we should be debating, because it has very, very serious implications for democracy and for social cohesion. Now, should we, I ask you, rely on operating systems who prioritize those that pay the most over those who want to reach all audiences, or even who want to notice particular ignored audiences? Shouldn't we have a debate before we change our television culture into one in which the main sources of information come from people who seek only to satisfy those who can afford their services, rather than the people who want to serve everyone? If that's going to happen, then I think we should be clear as a society that that's what we want. We have to work together to urge our political leaders and our regulators to recognize that the obstacles are rapidly blocking the good things that PSB content does for everyone in this country. There is no question that we as broadcasters have the power to change. We have the talent to change, and we are ready to evolve our businesses to earn our places in the future. But without the support of the national powers that can offer us a modicum of control by legislative right, I wouldn't bank on us still be doing this the same way in 2030. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alex. That was a very, very thoughtful speech. We could spend some time kind of digging into it. We've got 4 or 5 minutes. Let's just start with, in a sense, that point you were making towards the end, which is really about universality and social cohesion. When you look across town at the BBC, and this morning we had a new Secretary of State, and the plethora of new initiatives that are sort of going to revisit the whole concept of the licence fee. And then we look at some of the comments that are being made across from Osterley around what is a PSB and should the commercial PSBs perhaps be divided between Channel 4 and BBC and then everyone else because they have certain privileges as well, but they're still commercial players. I mean, there's quite a lot of unpicking going on here in terms of the whole model. Can you see a way through for Channel 4 to be able to articulate really clearly what it wants from the PSB review in the time frame that's available? Because all this is going to play out, as you say, new chief executive of Ofcom, new people over at the BBC. I mean, there's an awful lot happening, and none of it was in the Conservative manifesto, as far as I can tell. So it's a new environment, and at the heart of the speech was the thing about prominence, but it's more than prominence, isn't it? It's the whole model, and it's the whole way in which the ecosystem works.
Yes. You're right.
We're in fervent agreement.
I agree with you, you're right.
Yeah.
No, look, I think the question is, what I'm saying is, there's a huge PSB review this year, and Ofcom has started that PSB review with how do we think about what public service, broadcasting or content is. My point is it's a fundamental piece of British society, and that is the same for BBC and it is the same for ITV, and we have to make sure that we work together strongly as an industry to be clear that the prominence rules are out of date. They only apply to traditional EPGs, really, and that we need a framework for that applies on new ways of accessing content. And I think we and the BBC and others have all of that in common. I think it is very important that in that discussion we elevate the fact and the knowledge about how much public service content does for society. Because if you get caught in a market failure argument, and you say, well, there's plenty of content, isn't there? I mean, Netflix has got all this content, we've got more content than we've ever had. But that content doesn't come from a place of caring about public service values. And as you know better than me, often content appears there that's like public service broadcast content, but it always starts on the public service broadcasters. That's where the innovation comes from, it's where the skills bed for creativity in this country comes from, it's where the factual, impartial news comes from. And if we lose that, it'll be too late to get it back.
Stephen Van Rooyen this morning made it very clear in his view that Sky's news proposition, Sky's commitment to drama, Sky's commitment to local production, to building studios, equates to a very significant comparison in terms of public value. So it seems to me that the debate that's about to unfold is about far more than prominence. It's going back to core principles about the ecology of the BBC and Channel 4, and then the other PSB license holders. So I'm just wondering whether or not, in a sense, what the government is sort of currently saying it's looking at and what will end up unfolding are two quite different things.
I think the Secretary of State was clear this morning that they are supporters of public service broadcasting. He made points about reform of the BBC, but he was also very clear about the value of public service content in this country, and they don't want to lose that. I just think throughout the debate about the PSB review, we've got to be really clear about what legislative mechanisms we need in place for that. And of course, Sky contributes plenty of great content to the sector too, But the prominence rules are not up to date for how we're distributed on Amazon or on Android or on any of others. We have to go and fight commercially each time for a place there, and we don't have the money of the bigger players, and the BBC doesn't have the money to do that either.
Alex, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.